Yeah, so guys, welcome back to another video. This is another what if, I can't actually say his name, what if Althist, don't know how to say it, but I read to this guy's channel the other day and I really enjoyed the video, and you all seem to really enjoy the video as well, and suggested some other ones to do from his channel. And one was what would World War III be like, and the last one he was sort of predicting wars that will happen in the 2020s, 2030s, and he seems to know what he was talking about. You know, like when you listen to someone talk, sometimes you'll hear a channel and you just sort of know they're just spouting, they're just saying stuff to sort of say it. They're not actually saying it with sort of meaning or like sort of research. You're just sort of saying it through whatever means necessary, maybe just to get views and stuff. But he said it, and with like the sort of logics behind it, and just even the way he spoke about it, he just seemed to know what he was talking about. And I really enjoyed the video. And actually, I'm gonna subscribe to him because I did like that video, and I'm expecting more incredible ones from him. But sometimes it is nice to sort of see the comedic sort of videos and to laugh at sort of serious topics, but at the same time sometimes it's actually nice to sort of learn and feel like you're actually sort of really seeing something that could possibly happen. But you know what, it is what it is. I like both sort of styles of videos, but I did enjoy his ones in particular, so I'm definitely down to do more. But I don't know what videos people from him would like to see next, but just comment down below and we'll see. But yeah, let's just get into this. I'm interested in seeing, basically, my guess to this is what would World War III be like. It would definitely be probably the end of civilization, and that's probably the end of the questions. Thanks for watching the video. Bye. Nah, but that's probably it. I mean, that's going to be the end of it, right? I mean, he's probably going to go in depth with certain things and stuff like that, but that's my guess. But yeah, let's get into this. Quick shout out to my Instagram, quick shout out to my Twitter, links in the description for those. Same for my second channel, links in the description for those interested. But let's get into this
The
one.
long peace has held for 80 years. There hasn't been a major war between industrialized powers since World War II. However, the specter of war has always hung over us, like a horrifying sword of Damocles, ready to slit our throats. The world is already facing incredible geopolitical tension. This is for a variety of reasons that I covered in this earlier video in this series of videos I'm making about modern
Why is the world crazy now? Why is America crazy now? Might have to check those ones out as well.
politics.
Down for that.
This video exists to discuss what would happen if war were to break out, not why or how it would break out. What would happen if the unthinkable were to occur? Who would fight? Who would win? How would the war be fought? The answers will be horrifying. Why just hear about World War III if you could also play
Getting
through
his
it
money,
as
yeah.
well? This video
Deserves
is sponsored by Conflict of Nations,
World
which is
War. Check it out, man. I'm happy for him. He deserves it. Whenever someone's getting their ads, getting their money, it makes me happy, genuinely.
by typing the right name and password. Also, get the What If Altis special promo, which is, if you click the link in the description, you can get 13,000 gold and a 1-month premium subscription for free. This offer is available only for 30 days, so
Oh, so it's not now. That's a shame. That's a shame. Setting the stage.
a rough map of the coalitions in the conflict would look something like this. People don't tend to view the world this way, but
So TBD. So Turkey would be sort of in the middle. This is a few countries. I forget what countries these are. But yeah, a few Asian countries there. Bangladesh? No, Bangladesh? Yeah, that's Bangladesh there. Is this Is that Kazakhstan there? What country is this? I don't actually know.
similarly to before World War I, the world is now broadly in two alliance structures, the Chinese and American. The politics we get fed in the news is often remarkably misleading to the actual nature of geopolitics. Countries that like to scorn America the most in public, like Western Europe or the Philippines, are actually firm American allies and getting more so. Similarly, China has hidden massive influence in poorer nations that rarely gets talked about. This map is open up
yeah,
to
I know,
a
I'm
great
glad
deal
about
of
that.
interpretation.
Especially
Russia
in
and
Africa.
China, for example,
They've got a really big influence in certain places, don't they? Like they sort of build certain things, but it's very sketchy the way they do their stuff. I'm not gonna lie.
are currently allies, but their partnership is tenuous at best, and it wouldn't surprise me if we see China and Russia go to war at some point before the mid-century.
Oh, wow.
In the US-Chinese war, the Europeans and Russians might just sit out and watch from the side. Similarly, Turkey and Thailand alternate sides depending on the wind. Turkey and Russia have serious beef now, so I'm putting Turkey in the American camp for now. Similarly, Thailand is politically aligned with America, but culturally and economically is either close to China or a Chinese puppet, so I put them in the neutral category. China has lots of allies in places like Africa and South America, places like Venezuela, Tanzania, or Angola, but these countries are so poor, militarily weak, and removed from China that it would be suicide for them to side with the Chinese in a conflict, and so these countries remain neutral. It's sort of similar to how Iran and Argentina were sympathetic to the Nazis in World War II, but stayed neutral. It doesn't matter how the war would break out. For the sake of the scenario, let's just say it does. Something goes horrifically wrong. It doesn't matter if it starts in North Korea, Armenia, the Himalayas, or Ukraine. A global conflict just starts. Something else I need to cover before we continue to the actual scenario is the role of nuclear bombs. I don't think any of the great powers would use nuclear weapons. First of all, most nuclear powers, including China, with the exception of the US and Russia, have treaties saying they won't use nuclear weapons unless their home countries are directly nuked first. Given the Chinese Communist Party's record of keeping promises, this isn't much in of itself, but nuclear war is in no one's self-interest. No one wants the end of humanity, and more importantly, everyone knows that no one wants it. If anyone is to use nukes, it would be one of the weaker and more insecure powers like Pakistan, North Korea, or Iran, but these wouldn't have enough ability to shake the human race. Restraint is actually the norm in military history. Total wars were only really waged in the 20th century AD and 3rd century BC for reasons due to advancing...
I know he's gone past it, but just look at this, man. Look at Russia and the US. Just, what, 10, 20 times? More than 20 times third place? More? Are you crazy? Bro, that is wild to me, man.
Like Pakistan, North Korea, or Iran, but these wouldn't have enough ability to shake the human race. Restraint is actually the norm in military history. Total wars were only really waged in the 20th century AD and 3rd century BC for reasons due to advancing military technology. Chemical warfare was never used in the Second World War, noble casualties were remarkably low in the High Middle Ages, and the draft didn't appear until the Napoleonic Wars for this reason. Also, missile defense systems like THAAD have gotten good enough they can knock missiles out of the sky at a 50% rate. A nuclear war in 1980 would cause 1 billion casualties. Now we're at 300 million. Hypersonic missiles might be changing this, but I'm not sure where we are in that arms race. Similarly, countries like China are at such a disadvantage in the nuclear arms race with the Americans that they would want to press their advantage in conventional warfare with their massive demographic and industrial advantage. We would likely end up with a treaty by which the Americans, Russians, and Chinese would agree not to nuke each other if neither side agreed to attack their countries proper. No bombs or troops in Honolulu or Shanghai. Finally, before we start, I want to have a note of modesty here. Every military prediction has gone pretty wrong. People far smarter than me with far more information than I have predicted practically every war terribly wrong. If, heaven forbid, a war were to break out, I would be very wrong in at least a couple things. The war would generally form a ring around the Eurasian continent. The Central Powers, as we can call them here for fun, would occupy the center of the Eurasian continent, while America, which we can call Oceania for fun, would control the oceans and maintain a coalition around the edges. In this part of the video, we're going to go through each theater of the conflict going clockwise, starting in Korea. The Korean peninsula would be a nasty fight. North and South Korea both have some of the biggest militaries on Earth, with, in sheer numbers, North Korea's being nearly as large as the United States. North Korea has an immense amount of missiles, and so could turn Seoul, a city of 10 million people, into rubble pretty quickly. This is the most heavily defended region in the world, and so the North Koreans would incur heavy casualties crossing the border. Massive Chinese armies would cross the border, pushing back the Americans and South Koreans by sheer weight of number. However, some factors make me think America would be able to stabilize a perimeter in South Korea. Firstly, the peninsula renders the Chinese advantage in numbers less, as the Americans can maintain a tight defensive perimeter and use naval forces to control coastal regions. This plays into the American military doctrine's number one advantage, sheer firepower. Similarly, Korea is a mountainous region with brutal weather, continually shrinking the amount of areas America has to defend and giving the defenders yet another advantage. The South Koreans would likely fight like demons in order to protect their homeland, knowing what North Korean conquest would entail. Also, in the previous Korean War, the Chinese' main advantage was how low-tech they were. Chinese armies could climb mountains living off a bowl of rice and attack Americans from behind, or lose 1/3 of their men in a blizzard and still outnumber the Americans. As China has become a wealthier nation with a more high-tech military, this stopped working, thus making Korea's mountainous geography play even more into America's advantage. The Korean peninsula likely stabilized into a horrific stalemate. An interesting alternative is that the US would invade Vladivostok in Russia in order to create a second front to try to pick a fight further away from China, and thus one they'd be more capable of winning. I'm not sure how this would turn out. The main next theater would be Taiwan. A decade ago, I'd just say that America's overwhelming naval advantage would mean they just blow the Chinese boats out of the water. However, the Chinese have put massive effort into land-to-ocean defense systems, meaning I'm not sure if American ships could survive in the Taiwan Strait. The projections I've seen from the Chinese government, for what it's worth, say the US could no longer protect Taiwan after 2020. Considering how Chinese forces are massing in southeastern China, this seems plausible.
They're really looking to do it like that then? They're actually planning it.
My guess is that the Chinese would seize Taiwan in case of a war. Once in Taiwan, the Chinese would start to put in defense systems there in order to push their perimeter in the South and East China Seas further out, in order to start menacing the Philippines and Okinawa. One of the things people just don't believe when I tell them is that the US and Vietnam are now good allies. This is since in the US, the Vietnam War was a seminal and traumatizing moment. Meanwhile, over the last 1,000 years, China's invaded Vietnam 27 times. This 1,000 years of continuous resistance to the Chinese, French, Americans, Japanese, and local Southeast Asian powers has made the Vietnamese a formidable warrior people, but would it be enough? No. Geography plays too much against Vietnam. Cambodia and Laos are Chinese allies, and the roads are good enough that the Chinese can move troops into these areas and so attack Vietnam on every border. Vietnam is a very long and thin country, and so if you can split it in one place, the two main power centers in the far north and south are broken. Similarly, the Vietnamese heartland around the Red River lies very close to the Chinese border. The Chinese would likely conquer Vietnam, and like every time before, the Vietnamese would retreat into the jungle and fight a guerrilla campaign. Thailand is surrounded by Chinese allies and is friendly with China, and with the fall of Vietnam would switch sides to the Chinese, similarly to how they allied with Japan during World War II. Malaysia and Indonesia are generally American allies, and this would be cemented by them being coastal nations with coastal capitals. If these nations were to side against the Americans, the US would just bomb their capitals into rubble. The US would likely be able to cement a defensive perimeter in the Kra Isthmus in Thailand, using the jungle terrain and peninsula to protect its position. In general, in the Far East, the Chinese would be able to take the initiative in the early stages of the war, since although their military is weaker by many metrics than the Americans would be defending the entire world, and the Chinese would be just focusing on East Asia.
Yeah, that's a good point. They'd have a lot of sort of a smaller area to focus on, whereas the US are literally just protecting the world. But at the same time, because they'd be fighting from the European side, I feel like they'd have a lot of European allies backing them. And because I know a lot of European sort of countries have big militaries themselves, and they're just powerful countries. I'm sure they would help a lot, but still, the possibility, and like you said, they were sort of planning to invade a certain country initially. I forget which one it's called, but the fact they're already planning it, and there's probably going to be tensions between the US and China. I mean, you never know. One thing could lead to another, and it could genuinely spark something. But fingers crossed, man. Fingers crossed it doesn't. But you just don't know.
And thus would be able to concentrate their forces into that area. The next theater is India, an American ally, who would be fighting a horrifying defensive campaign. India is surrounded by Chinese allies, with Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Burma
Literally
all Chinese
surrounded.
allies. Bangladesh is simultaneously both a Chinese and American ally. Sri Lanka, being an island, would end up being an American ally in real terms. Also, India wouldn't let Bangladesh choose who they were going to side with. They would either strong-arm Bangladesh into their coalition or conquer it. However, all of this means India would end up fighting a three-front war. Pakistan would invade the northwest, while the Chinese would launch an attack over the Himalayas. Much of this campaign would be determined by how big this attack would be. The Chinese have been building a lot of highways in this area and would be able to build them quickly with their construction abilities, unless the Indians were capable of stopping them, that is. The US could likely shell the crap out of Rangoon, thus rendering Burma pretty weak, but it would still be a useful vector for Chinese forces to attack eastern India. The Indians could likely stop them at a geographic choke point in the jungles of the Brahmaputra, where they stopped the Japanese last time. If the Chinese and Pakistanis could form a decent coalition and break into the North Indian Plain, the Indians would be done. Delhi lies in the northwest of India on the North Indian Plain. India is militarily and industrially far less effective than the Chinese. The US would likely sink immense resources into keeping India alive. Much of this conflict is determined by how far India is developmentally now. Is Indian nationalism strong enough among the peasantry and lower classes that they'd keep fighting a war with the loss of Delhi if that occurred? Could India gear up to form the massive military-industrial complex it would need, and would its roads be capable of supporting its military supplies? Would pulling people off the farms result in starvation in the cities? Factors like this would determine the outcome of this conflict. With both nations here having more combined population than the entire world during World War II, and with both sides using human wave tactics and prone to committing atrocities, just this theater of the war would probably be the bloodiest.
It'd probably define it honestly as well. I mean, bloodiest is also true, but 2.8 billion people, 1.4 billion on each side. And I know when it comes to a world war, so many people they're forced into they're forced into fighting for their country. Many people are. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. Force maybe not be the right word, but you have to fight for your country, and like, if you don't do it, you're seen as like a traitor and all that sort of stuff. So maybe if this did happen, there'd be hundreds of millions from each side that just have to fight. And I can't imagine how crazy that would be. That's wild.
War in history. Going into the Middle East, things get more complicated.
Because you see how armies do get bigger. Like I still remember the US video I saw, and like the army obviously fluctuates the size of the army, but when it comes to like a big war, like a world war, it goes up massively and then drops and then goes up when it's another world war, and it obviously goes to show that would be the case when it did, or if it did happen again.
As they always do in that part of the world. We've already ascertained Turkey would be an American ally at this point. Turkey is the giant of this region, with an economy larger than Saudi Arabia and Iran, its major rivals combined, and the best military. Iraq is both an American and Iranian ally, and would likely end up siding with the Iranians. You would generally see a coalition of Turkey, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt against Iran, Syria, Iraq, and Russia. The Turks would be able to conquer Syria and northern Iraq, failed states for the most part. Iran and Saudi Arabia would get stuck in an intractable conflict. The Iranians would block off the Straits of Hormuz, thus killing trade to the Persian Gulf states, their rivals. The US, with too much on its plate already, would ignore this for now. Saudi Arabia likely wouldn't survive this total war, with a terrible military except for a couple elite regiments and barely having social cohesion now. The Turks and Iranians seem to have no grudge with the other now, and so I could see the two powers agreeing to not fight the other and partitioning the region. The Azeris and Turks would combine to crush the Armenians, would get stuck in an intractable campaign in the Caucasus with the Russians. No one makes progress in the Caucasus since the climate is so hellish. The only way the Turks could gain an advantage is by getting the Chechens, fellow self-governing Muslim sort of related peoples in the north slope of the Caucasus, to rebel against the Russians. Moving into Europe, the Russians would drive into Eastern Europe. This brings us to the
I know what country it was. Ukraine. This is Ukraine, isn't it? The one that I was thinking
clear
of.
Point where I'm not entirely sure what Russia's military capabilities even are now. I've heard very conflicting reports where their military is either barely functioning or has regained most of their Soviet military projection abilities. The Russians' ability to show up is decisive here. Belarus being a Russian ally means that the Russians would be able to sever the Baltics and conquer them with relative ease. Ukraine similarly would be relatively easy pickings. I've heard it would take several months for America to move a full field army into Eastern Europe, and so the Poles would have to hold out until then. Whether they'd be able to depends on if the Russians would fully show their colors. In general, with a population and economy 1/10 China's size, the Russian front would always take a backseat to the Asian. I could see Crimea becoming a frontier. Like in the Crimean War, America and Turkey would control the Black Sea, and Crimea, being a defensible position on the Russian side of the sea, would be a perfect staging ground to strike into the soft Russian underbelly.
Technological progress. Here we go. Time to get
Military
scared.
technology would have a decisive effect here. I'm just not sure how. Every war in the modern world fought decades since the last major war is a complete unknown. People went into World War I projecting the trends of the Napoleonic Wars, of massive offensive attacks and massive toy soldier armies would just continue on a bigger scale, and they were oh so wrong. All the major militaries will go into this conflict thinking like World War II, and they will all be very wrong. There's no good way to read exactly how technology will affect the war. On one hand, missiles could help the defense, with destroying any attacking troops or GPS allowing bombing roads so effectively that no one can muster attacking forces. However, communications technology also makes coordinating attacks, one of the forgotten major issues generals faced, so much easier. Similarly, the last major wars America has fought in, the wars in Iraq, demonstrate that modern technology has just made the blitzkrieg more powerful. The only honest conclusion we can reach is that we just don't know. There are several things to consider, however, one of which is that when generals are in doubt, lives are lost. An aim of every military is to lose as few of their men as possible, and so when generals don't know what they're doing, lives are lost. I've read some estimates saying we would have casualty rates higher than World War I. A very cynical way of viewing it is that due to the immense population growth of the last...
I mean, surely that would be the case. That would be my sort of judgment. You see how the population nowadays is just ridiculous. You'd assume that it would be much
decades,
more than that.
Human lives are getting to be a cheaper commodity, especially for nations like China.
That's such a sad way to put it, but it's true. A commodity, that's such a sad way to put it, but it is true, man. That's such a depressing way to put it,
Or
man.
India. The bigger countries today can fight the Somme several times over and not bat an eye. Several new fronts would open up. Trump was mocked for creating the Space Force, which was viewed as ridiculous. However, in real terms, it was actually a very smart decision. With practically our entire civilization wired through satellites, we have to keep them safe in order to keep our society alive. A new front will open up in space between rival satellites. Similarly, there will be a new front in digital warfare. With our lives so dependent upon the internet and computer networks, shattering your enemy's cyber defenses could be a killer move. This could result in shattering a rival nation's electrical or banking system. Something people don't talk about is logic bombs, or coding bombs planted in another nation's vital systems that are waiting for wars to be turned on. The combination of logic bombs and missiles could shatter a nation's supply chain. This would make this war an especially nasty one to fight in the home front. For nations with massive food dependencies, the results could potentially be devastating. An interesting corollary to this is that much of modern military technology is exceptionally specialized, with only a few factories around the world capable of producing it and supported by highly complex parts. Knocking out these factories with missiles or systemic failures could result in delaying production of modern weaponry. We could end up with a war with some modern tanks, for example, and swarms of easy-to-make pseudo-World War II era ones. When you consider that a modern tank can easily take out 12 World War II era ones, it means we're returning in many ways to the Middle Ages, with a few knights cutting through peasant cannon fodder like butter. The social effects of this would be enormous in the long term. A positive side effect of this would be an immense technological revolution. We seem to be on the verge of multiple technological revolutions now, whether possibly biological, nanotechnological, robotic, or AI.
It's kind of a good way he puts it, actually, because I swear the world wars actually led to like technology with sort of war, like bombs and all these different sort of technologies with spacecraft, aircraft, ships, all these different things. The technology went crazy, and you can see it happening with this. If it was like cyber wars, just technology would just go mental. So you know what? Maybe a cyber war could be a good thing. Just don't get the UK. You know, if you don't touch the UK, I'll be happy, because I want my iPhone 21. Yeah, I want my iPhone 21 to be see-through, and I want it to do just the craziest things. I want to be able to have like holograms that you can actually touch. That'd be so sick. But you know what? Why would I do holograms that you can touch for a world war? You know what? I have my dreams and wishes, right?
Total wars have always
it's a good
put
point
technological progress into overdrive as governments put massive investment.
I mean, you look here, stainless steel invention. Penicillin was from World War One. I thought it was before that. Kleenex. Like, Kleenex is the tissues, right? Kleenex? I swear Kleenex is those tissues, like, to blow your nose. Yeah. Oh, wow, it actually was. That's crazy. That is wild. Tanks, poison gas, maybe not so good. Public health, flight advances, sanitary pads, missiles, synthetic rubber, jet engines, nuclear, radar, satellites, computers. I mean, if it was a cyber war and no lives were lost, I mean, cyber war, that probably would be because certain things still, but just technology would boom, wouldn't it?
Military,
it is a good point.
People risk technologies that might not work. Coming out of this war, we'd be far more technologically advanced than we would going into it. However, the negative side effect of this is that troops in the battlefield would be faced with nightmarish technologies. It's hard to say what technologies in development will eventually see the front line, but we're currently seeing space-based lasers, robotic bee assassin swarms, StarCraft-style electric body armor.
If you guys have seen Black Mirror, the series on Netflix, those bee things, that just gets into my mind, and it's like we're living in a sort of just a crazy world where technology literally does run everything. Bro, are you hearing what he's saying? Some of these things are ridiculous. All of them are ridiculous, but some in particular.
The battlefield to be faced with.
Imagine being a human having to face something like that. Like, you're so just. You just can't do anything. A laser coming, like,
nightmarish technologies. It's hard to say what technologies in development will eventually see the front line, but we're currently seeing space-based lasers, robotic bee assassin swarms, StarCraft-style electric body armor suits, and invisibility cloaking technology all in some form of development.
What? How? Bro, that...
In general, if it exists in a science fiction movie, a military is probably working on it at some level. Robots are a very interesting thing, as things like missile warfare will be fought in matters of seconds, and as leaders want less actual humans to die, the onus will be on them to rely on robots or things like drones. However, if human judgment is imperfect in war, robots who are terrible at seeing context would be even worse. Atrocities would skyrocket at a horrifying rate in future war if robots are used as their ability to distinguish civilian from combatant gets worse. The Central Power's greater willingness to commit these kinds of atrocities with robots will give them a greater advantage. In the long term, the use of robots likely end up becoming taboo after this war for the atrocities they commit. One thing that won't go away due to technological progress is the infantry. On the opposite side of the spectrum of the people who expect World War II again are the people who see that the infantry in conventional warfare will become redundant due to push-button warfare. This has been a common claim since the invention of the machine gun, which was supposed to make war so horrifying that it could never be fought again. This argument always misses and continues to miss two important variables. Firstly, that weapons tests in labs are always painfully inaccurate for the effects of terrain on a battlefield. For example, in World War I, artillery and poison gas were never able to completely wipe out the enemy like they did in tests. This is since, by hiding in foxholes and trenches, surprising amounts of troops were able to survive. Secondly, that the infantry is the only thing you can use to hold on to terrain, which ends up being one of the biggest parts of a war. You can bomb areas into oblivion, but you need the infantry to control them.
Who would win?
There are several variables to determine who the victor would be, the first of which is how much the Chinese would show up. I've heard very conflicting reports on what the Chinese military's capabilities are. I've heard it's simultaneously very corrupt and has done a good...
So this is what I was talking about, how when it comes to like a war, the military will just triple, quadruple, quintuple, however you say, just like times 50.
The job at reform. From my experience of having been to China, personal experience with dealing with Chinese systems and reading history is that the Chinese either completely fail by letting internal corruption and division eat themselves alive, or they bring their A game and completely crush everyone else. This is the main deciding factor for a war. If China is capable of using its massive population and industry to full bear, they will win, and if not, they won't. China likely has immense potential industrial ability in a war, and a huge amount depends on how much the Americans can disrupt this and also retool American industry. As mentioned before, a similar situation exists with Russia on a smaller scale. On the American side, America will have to pick up the slack for their coalition for a while until their mostly pacifist allies, like the Western Europeans or Japanese, can pick up the slack. Although the Chinese have immense mobilizational abilities, the massive size of America's alliance means that they'd be able to win if everyone mobilizes. If America's allies can mobilize within the first year, and America has not lost a decisive defeat, the Americans will win. The Americans, for example, have nearly all of Europe as an ally, a region that has immense potential if militarized. In a good scenario, the Europeans would be able to pick up the slack in Europe and the Middle East, while the Japanese can do so in East Asia. The Turks become a full military power. Indians especially stay alive and are capable of fully industrializing.
They are surrounded,
India is a
aren't they?
decisive partner that will either disappoint or impress depending on their current developmental level. Arming the Europeans, Japanese, and Turks would have massive geopolitical effects after the war that I don't want to get into. This brings us depending on their current developmental level. Arming the Europeans, Japanese, and Turks would have massive geopolitical effects after the war that I don't want to get into.
So there's fallout. Is that the one? Is that the way you put it? There's fallout from the war. There's things that would happen after the war that come from this world war that would lead to more. Fuck. Please don't happen. I'm praying.
This brings us to the.
It's just again. I always say this when I do these types of videos, but it's just the leaders. Every human in the world, living in all these different countries around the world, doesn't want any of this to happen. It's the leaders and just these idiots at the top, man. These idiots at the top just think.
The ultimate failure of American policy in Europe, a European backstab. France and Germany are some of America's most independent European allies, actively supporting foreign policies against America's self-interest. These nations pull a general dislike of America by their populations.
Wait, what?
Against America's self-interest. These nations...
In many countries, large majorities prefer US leadership. US, both, neither. China. Oh, so it is still US, very heavily US based. I was about to say, I was confused for a minute. In some countries it's closer. Tunisia, China. Russia is more China, way more China, but the majority is both, neither, don't know. The UK 67. What's the highest? Sweden 76. Sweden very high, god damn. What's the lowest for China? Hungary 9.
Pull a general dislike of America by their populations. If the Russians were to crush America and Eastern Europe, these Western European nations, far enough away to feel secure, could create a deal with the Russians that would give the Russians Eastern Europe in exchange for cheap resources. This would end up being a complete collapse of the American position in Europe. China's biggest weakness is they're thousands of miles from their oil supply and can barely feed themselves. With America blocking their naval route, they'd strengthen their land route through Central Asia to the Middle East's oil. However, this is a long, arduous, and tenuous supply line. The native populations in the areas in between don't really like the Chinese either. Their leaders just want money.
Look at their shoes. I can't get over their shoes. Their white shoes.
The US will support Islamist movements in Central Asia, including, likely, ironically, the Taliban, in order to sever Chinese supply lines.
What?
Similarly, the Chinese would start to farm neighboring countries, especially in Russia, and extracting resources to feed themselves after the US would blockade China. This brings up a major weakness in...
Did I hear that right? I'm just sort of processing what you just said.
Similarly, want money. The US will support Islamist movements in Central Asia, including, likely, ironically, the Taliban, in order to sever Chinese supply lines.
When he says support, does he mean they will give them weapons? Because, I mean... talk about deja vu. This happened years ago and it went wrong. I mean, I maybe they don't mean by weapons, but when he says support, how else can you support a certain group of people? That's... I mean, again, he could be completely wrong, and again, this is all theory, but that idea is just mind-blowing to me.
Similarly, the Chinese would start to farm neighboring countries, especially in Russia, and extracting resources to feed themselves after the US would blockade China. This brings up a major weakness in the Chinese alliance, that no one really likes China. The Chinese have a tendency to act in a very arrogant and unpleasant manner in geopolitics due to their thousands of years of hegemony. If the Russians were to face a crippling defeat to the Americans, and with the Chinese settling more and more of far eastern Siberia, I could see the Russians backstabbing the Chinese.
100%. I mean, we all know the leaders in Russia for years and years, USSR, however you want to put it, Soviet Union. They are known for like being, just don't trust them, you know. And I mean, in this case scenario, it's actually for the good of us, but for China, nah.
Similarly,
it's kind of a sketchy thing to have Russia as one of your main allies. It is kind of sketchy for me, but same way round for Russia to have China as one of its allies.
I could see the Central Asian regimes, already unstable and unpopular, collapsing due to populist anti-Chinese rebellions, angry at China leeching away resources and their boys dying in Pakistan for conflicts they don't care about. On a separate note, the US may appear very divided now, but still has a good deal of civic pride and has a history of coming together in crises like Pearl Harbor, Fort Sumter, or 9/11. The US tends to wear its problems very openly, so it tends to appear in worse shape than it really is.
Yeah, I see what he means. I do kind of see what he means there. But at the same time, from what we're seeing now, you don't know, you can't like tell. But there is a lot of tensions in the US. But again, there's just a lot of tensions in the world. Politics really just does make people go crazy, man. It makes people hate each other. Why are politics a thing? I just hate politics so much. Oh my days. But again, at the same time, I guess we need politics to move forward, to do certain things. All the things that have happened for the last 200, 300 years, from like slavery being abolished to like gay marriage being allowed and all these different things. I guess that, like, politics is what leads to progress and just sort of helping certain things. But at the same time, it just makes people hate each other. I mean, at the end of the day, it's politics that makes these wars happen. The majority of the time. I mean, some is just like resources and stuff, but politics for a lot of the time.
Similarly, American foreign policy and public opinion tends to have the emotional state of a teenager due to its Calvinist heritage and isolationist geography, alternating between immense self-guilt and loathing and extreme aggression and self-righteousness. If America was attacked, it would go from guilty to aggressive and self-righteous very fast. Yeah. China and Russia are very patriotic now, but their forms of patriotism come from the loyalty populations that have had their leadership give them real physical benefits have. However, since these are autocracies in which the population has very little control or responsibility for the government, this could quickly transform into hatred if the war effort went badly. Due to the massive geographic regions involved and probably super high casualties alongside nuclear treaties, this wouldn't be a war ended by seizing the enemy's capital, but one in which one nation's will broke before the others. To summarize, America would win this war if it could mobilize its allies effectively, and if not, China would win. Without the help of its allies, America just can't get over the fact that there are 4 Chinese for every American, a kill ratio that's almost...
And that's wild when you realise the United States is one of the most populated countries itself, like top 3, top 4. I think it's the 3rd most populated country in the world. And China, has quadrupled the population, like what? Or nearly quadruple. Like, it's just... Well, no, it is It is quadruple.
Never been matched in history.
More than quadruple.
Well, that was a cheery video. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment, subscribe, or stay tuned for additional content. Or alternatively, check out Conflict of Nations by clicking the link in the description.
Getting his ad again, man. Shout out to him. But mate, I remember doing these types of videos from infographics, and I do enjoy infographics. I find their channel quite fun, but only for certain subjects. Other subjects, they seem, whether it be biased or they just sort of say certain things to say it. This guy knows what he's talking about. He's got in-depth like sort of research into it, and again, like he said, this may not be true. It's just a guess with sort of stats and like all these different things with research. And I tell you what, I mean, I really enjoyed this video, and I like just how, again, I said this like 100 times now, how in depth he goes, man. Meanwhile, South Americans are either in a pub having fun or in the middle of an economic crisis, or both. Everybody is a gangster until an Austrian kid falls in. Switzerland is like the cameraman who will survive any adversity. Me, a physically fit 18-year-old male, yeah. Please, I pray to God, no. Famous last words, nobody's going to launch the nukes, right? Plot twist, Switzerland starts World War 3 and Germany's neutral. Fuck's sake. To be fair, nowadays, Germany is like a country that is very, very peaceful. So I wouldn't even go against that. That could be true, but Switzerland would be like, damn, another good freaking movie. India surrounded. Oh man, oh man. Wait, no, Germany? I thought we were talking about World Wars. World War 3 starts. Apple, let's introduce iGun, iGrenade, iGun Max Pro. And you know, if Apple, if they made, obviously they wouldn't, but if they made like an iGun, a generation, the first generation one would just stop working at one point, and then it'll be like the fifth generation that has all the iOS updates. Because Apple, man, they take the piss. They forget about their previous generations as soon as a new one comes out. Them guys are ridiculous. If World War 3 starts, I'm moving to Switzerland. Honestly, that's a shout. But I swear the tax there is ridiculous. But to be honest, I mean, tax is the least of your worries when you're in a world war. So Switzerland it is, man. I would actually, if it happened, that actually might be a shout. I'm not even going to lie. India, Pac, China, Axis explained very terribly. 90% of Himalayan terrain favours India. He didn't mention this, but he mentioned hellish climate of the Caucasus. Franco-German alliance exists. 1,000-year rivalry. Wait, that's illegal. Fuck's sake. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this reaction. Again, like I said, check this guy out. His videos are so in-depth. And if you do enjoy sort of historical videos or future, like, guesstimate videos where it sort of predicts certain things, he's not actually really historical videos, is he? He's like more guesstimate and sort of research type things of things that could happen in the future. But if you do enjoy these videos, click the link in the description that I'll leave for this video and then go to his channel from that, because he is very, very good when it comes to these kinds of stuff. And I know there's a big sort of thirst for people to watch these kinds of videos. So I mean, yeah, check this out if you want. Class channel. And thanks for suggesting this. I'm definitely down to do more of this guy's channel and other channels that do similar style content. But just let me know what you want to see next, and until next time, like, subscribe.